I missed seeing you on Monday. For those of you who lived in the United States, I sure hope you had a nice Labor Day holiday. The bad boy stereotype is well known and unfortunately too often true. Why do some of us repeatedly get into a relationship with someone dangerous? Thank you so much for joining me here today on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience and a narcissistic abuse survivor. In this podcast, we're going to take a closer look at why we've mistaken intensity for attraction, along with the 10 different personality disorders and the common problem of the non-apology apology. Please leave a review and let us know what you think of the podcast, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Consider donating a cost of a cup of coffee in lieu of your support of the missions to set abuse victims free from toxic relationships. So with that, let's listen in to this replay of a TikTok Live. Do narcissists ever get better? I was listening to a seminar on working with narcissists, and these people are experts. In fact, one of them sat on the DSM-5 committee when they revamped the narcissistic personality disorder categories and developed the alternative model. So there's a new model of looking at personality disorders in addition to the criterion-based one. There is a new way in which we look at narcissistic personality disorders, or all of them actually. It's how we categorize them and understand them. So these are individuals who've been working with this group of people 20, 30, 40 years, amazing length of years. And in fact, one of them, the amount of references this person has in expertise is phenomenal. It just blew my mind. They categorize narcissists in one of three categories. And I thought this was fascinating because this is the question. There are those who get better. Now, what percentage of those I can't tell you. That's category 1. And category 2 are those who get worse. When you start working with them, they get worse. That's category 2. And category 3 is those who get dangerous. Now, which one are you in a relationship with? I have no idea. You will only know with time whether or not this person's going to get better, get worse, or get dangerous. I suspected the person I was married to was definitely getting worse. He was weaponizing what he was learning in therapy to get better at hiding. And I suspected that he was becoming dangerous. In fact, if you've read my book, you know that I strongly suspect that he was attempting to do a slow effort to take my life, that he was actually trying to kill me. He would have benefited from my death. And I was not the only person he was in a relationship who suspected that he was trying to kill this person. There was another person he was intimately involved with that I independently interviewed after I was doing the edits of the book. She confessed to me, and she had no idea of my story. She never even asked my story. She confessed to me that she also suspected he'd been trying to kill her as well. I remember our last meeting. We sat in a car parked alone in a empty park just a few miles away from the airport, and he was asking for some money that he felt he was owed from me. He didn't earn it, didn't deserve it, but he felt owed. And he leaned close and whispered a dog whistling comment that I knew that what he was basically saying, that he was going to kill me, that he was threatening to kill me, that I didn't pay up. He made me promise again with a handshake. How do we know if we're in a relationship with somebody who's going to get better? How do we know that? It takes time. Our problem is not whether or not we can't see what's happening, is that we often don't believe it. Cognitive dissonance causes us to get very messed up and causes us to not recognize the truth. So that's the situation that often ends up happening, that causes us not to see the reality of what's going on. What do I mean by that? When you meet the person that you met, you didn't really meet who they are. And in a way, that's kind of true for all of us. Let me not just say that they're super bad and it's so horrible that they're deceptive, because if you're honest, when you go on a date, how much effort do you put into getting ready? If you're a woman, probably a lot. You may have had your nails done, maybe your hair done. You're going to pick a best outfit. You're going to put your best foot forward. I'm sure if you're a guy, you're doing similar things. You're making sure the car is clean. You're making sure that your hair is done. And you go to efforts to make sure you really look good and that you smell good and everything like that. That's what you do to go out on a date. Why do we do that? Because a date is all about making the sale. You want somebody to think that you're wonderful and you want them to like you. So you put your best foot forward in an effort to be able to make good impressions. Now, those who are on the more narcissistic end, though, take this many, many steps further. They don't just go to the best effort. They go to the best effort to not only appear their best selves, but they also make themselves appear like they're like you. They begin to do what's called mimicking, parroting, and mirroring you. I've heard them actually confess to me that they create an identity based upon what they hear from you. They tell me that. My ex's records, I found that he had kept notes on each person he met, all their main characteristics, the things that they liked, how many children were in their lives, and what kind of jobs they had. He actually recreated himself and showed up to the person that they wanted to meet, not who he actually was. They do this in order for a couple things. One is it develops fast rapport. So it rapidly creates a sense of trust. You think that you met someone similar to you and it lets your guard down. You also really like them. I mean, that's the biggest thing is you end up being blown away that you have this incredible connection with somebody and you really like how that feels. But it does something else that's it's very vulnerable. It creates high suggestibility. So it disarms you because the trust is building too fast. So you're starting to feel this camaraderie, this similarity with them. You think you really have met yourself. You sense that. And as a result, you let your guard down and you become more open to suggestion as a result of that. These are tactics that are well known to be very effective, and they're used by people who are trying to deliberately manipulate people in order to make a sale, for example. Salesmen knows these things. Cult leaders know these things. Anybody who's trying to sway influence really rapidly, these are the things that they use in order to do that. So you've met somebody that you think is like you. And you know what happens out of that? We think we've met the real person. We walk away and that becomes our baseline. Think about back to your past relationships. Every time that you've met somebody like this who's been deceptive, you didn't really meet the real person. You assumed everything they said was true. I assumed the person I met was a church-going, classical music loving, managerial positioned person. I really assumed that. I didn't know he was into techno, he couldn't keep a job, and he rarely attended church. I didn't know that. That's not who he said he was. I assumed he was being honest. And that becomes the baseline that we used to look at, to compare who we then begin to live with. So when the mask starts to slip, we see the change and we just write it off as, oh, they're having a bad day, or this person's hungry, or they didn't rest well last night, or maybe they're sick. We write it off as an excuse instead of realizing that we've actually witnessed the real person that we've never met before, and now we're starting to see show up. So that's why often our assessment of whether or not this person's getting better or worse is off, because we're not assessing it against something accurately. We need to have a good baseline. And if we don't have a good baseline, then we can't compare. It'd be like me saying to myself, I want to lose weight. And I'll say, well, what's your starting weight? Oh, I don't know. It's somewhere out here. I really wish it was here. So I'm going to use that number, what I wished it was. And then I'm going to compare everything against that number. Well, how does that help me? It doesn't work at all. It's not a reality. So now everything that I'm comparing against is off. It's inappropriate, and I can't really tell whether I'm doing better or doing worse. So how do you know what's the truth? Because if you want to know whether or not your person that you're living with is going to get better, or versus who's going to get worse, or maybe, God forbid, they're going to get dangerous, you need to be able to know who you're really with. So this is what I want you to do. I want you to begin to watch what they do and ignore what they say. Watch what they do and ignore what they say. And then ask yourself, does people who deserve respect do these things? Do people who really have compassion, do they act that way? Do people who are concerned or show care, do they behave like this? I would write those behaviors down, and then I'd write a characteristic and actually ask myself, does those characteristics line up with that word? Is this care? Is this concern? Is this respect? Is this honoring me? And then begin to say, okay, so let me give you an example of what happened to mine said he was a manager. We went to a meeting, a team meeting, and I'm about ready to do a stitch on this. I think it's, at what point did you stop loving and respecting your partner? I think for me, this is one of the big pivotal moments in my relationship. We went to an important meeting with another company. We were sitting down with another company doing a business report. And since I was the president of the company, I was giving the report, and my ex was the vice president. He sat beside me. As he sat beside me, he was on his phone scrolling. Okay, ding number one. When you're in a business meeting, get off your damn phone. I didn't say anything because, so he's on his phone. It's not polite, not appropriate, but I'm not going to make a big deal and make it a moment of it. So I continue with the report. And as I'm giving this report, all of a sudden I hear the sounds of people having sex. The huffing and puffing and the heaving and all that stuff. The soundtrack that's noisy that you hear to X-rated movies. I'm hearing that coming from his phone. I look over at him and he goes, oh, yeah, a friend of mine just sent me a joke and I didn't know there was a soundtrack. I thought I had it on silence. So you're looking at a graphic video that's explicit. You're playing it in the middle of a meeting, hoping the sound is off, only the sound was on. So now we all know what you were doing. And you have a history of cheating, and you're doing this in public. No respect. I lost all respect. That's not respectful, honorable, loving behavior. That's someone who blew it. If I had been his boss at work, would have fired the guy. Would you be interested in meeting in person? Maybe you'd like to have a one-on-one appointment that's face-to-face. Well, on October 15th, I, along with 9 other narcissistic abuse content creators and coaches, will be live to meet you in Austin, Texas at the Deba Deba Labs. That includes Lee Hammock of Mental Healness, Lisa Sunny, Stronger Than Before, Catherine Kleiss, Stand Coaching, Trey De La Torre of I Was Like Yo, Trey, Nia Renee, How to Love a Battered Woman, along with many others, just to name a few. We'll be hosting a 90-minute VIP forum where you'll be taking your questions, along with the one-on-ones and a public meet and greet from 3 to 6 p.m. If you'd like to go, please register for the event through the link in the show notes below. I can't wait to see you. There are 10 personality disorders total. Narcissism is one of them. Borderline's another. Antisocial personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. There's 10 of them. Which one is the most common? Nope, it's not bipolar. It's not antisocial. Yes, it is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. That's the one that's the most common. The OCPD, not OCD, but OCPD is the most common. Do you know how you would describe what an OCPD is like? An obsessive compulsive personality disorder? What it's like? Oh, you have it. That's how you know. What are they like? Do you know what they're like? Well, then you can probably describe yourself. They are controlling. Exactly. They have the need to have everything under their control and to do it in a certain way, and they're very rigid and inflexible. If you want a movie image role of somebody who is a perfect example of an obsessive compulsive personality disorder, watch Ordinary People. The Mary Tyler Moore character, the mom in that story, is the perfect example of an OCPD. So if you ever want to know what that looks like, that's how you can recognize it. How you know you've been around one, they'll say, they're really a great person, but man, everything has to be their way. It's their way or the highway. You find yourself saying that, then you've met someone who has OCPD. Yeah, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, not OCD, which is a condition that causes a lot of anxiety. This is actually a personality disorder, which doesn't cause them any problems. And that's another big deal. So let me pause on that too, because I want to make sure we understand the difference between personality disorders and mental health conditions. Mental health conditions are things that happen to us. And when they happen, we feel really miserable. We don't like it. We're distressed. When you have a depression, you know something's wrong. You have no energy. You feel everything they describe it as feeling like the world is dark, really dark, and you can't get out of bed and you can't function. It feels horrible, just really, really horrible. So you don't like it. So conditions are things that happen to us and we don't like it and we want relief. But personality disorders are not things that happen to us. It's the way that we are. So we often don't even know that we have the problem. It's just the way that we function. We're hardwired, kind of built like that. The findings are in. We know what causes personality disorders. People are born this way. They're not made this way. I know there's a lot of assumption that childhood adversity theory is what happens, that they have a lot of trauma or they've had a lot of abuse, particularly sexual abuse, and that has resulted in this personality creation, but it is not true. When they actually do controlled studies against everyone who's had trauma and everyone who's ever had sexual abuse, that they find that it has no impact, that there's no difference. In fact, the majority of people who've had a sexual abuse trauma do not go on to have a personality disorder, that they are not related, which for any of us who've suffered SA, that's a big, huge relief that they're not connected. 80% based on twin studies show that personality disorders are primarily genetic or they're biosocial, biogenetic conditions, that there are things that we're born with. So what are they? Well, there's traits that all of us have that kind of create our ego functioning. There's like 12 of them, I believe. There's different traits in like impulse control. Can you resist the candy bar sitting in the house? Another one is judgment. Are you having the ability to know whether or not something's a sound decision or not? Are you able to observe yourself? That's actually a very complicated one. Can you objectify yourself enough to get up above yourself to the map level to look what you're doing so you can assess what it is? That's called self-reflection or introspection. Do you have the ability to handle your emotions and sit on them and control them and instead of them controlling you? All these things make up ego strengths. All of us are born with kind of varying degrees of how good or bad we do at all of these. And I know that I had a video that really upset the people in the borderline personality camp, and I didn't mean to be upsetting, but when you're born with some of the inherent weaknesses in some of these areas, then it makes it very difficult for you to be adaptable and flexible. And as a result, you tend to be very rigid. You tend to approach things very rigidly, and you tend to want control and power. What happens is you approach every situation that way, and you approach people like that, and you really struggle to be vulnerable and show up as yourself. And so as a result, you hurt people and you hurt relationships because of these characteristics. What advice do I give to someone who cycles through dangerous narcissists? Yeah, we do tend to do that. One of the things that happens is when you get into a relationship with one, and there's a really great account that you should be following. She has a new account. It's called Narc and Me on Instagram, and on Facebook, it's Al Levitch, or A Levitch. Narc and Me or A Levitch. And she just posted a video on this, and she calls it Lightning in the Bottle and Butterflies. And I really love that. Doesn't that capture it well? At first, we do feel that lightning in the bottle, and we do certainly have a lot of butterflies. But what happens is that we end up mistaking intensity and excitement as attraction, and we don't realize that it's really drama, that we're recognizing drama, and we've interpreted this as if we've met someone fantastic, and we interpret this as love, intensity instead of love. I would really recommend that you first do is get out long enough so that you're on firm ground and that you're no longer yourself stirred up. Because what happens when you're in a long-term relationship with somebody who's pathological is that your sympathetic system in your body, you have two systems, parasympathetic and sympathetic system. The parasympathetic is when you're calm. It's the low heart rate. It's the your skin's dry and your mouth, it's not dry, and your digestion is going and your blood pressure is normal. It's the calm state, and you should be in that state the majority of the time. But the sympathetic statement gets you ready for crises. So it's whenever you feel, say that you just get nearly missed on the road, you're driving and someone almost clips the car. That heart racing, heart pounding, your blood pressure goes up, digestion stops, your mouth is dry, and you're like in shock. That's your sympathetic system kicking on to protect you from a very catastrophic event. But when you're living in a chronically abusive situation, your sympathetic system activates and stays on. It's the fight or flight system, but it stays on, and it stays on too long. And as a result, it starts to do damage to us. It exhausts us, for one. Excessive cortisol, all sorts of stuff starts to happen, and it ultimately starts to do brain damage because we're not meant to be in these long-term chronic state of stress. and we start to lose a sense of trust in ourselves. So I would make sure before I started dating again that I felt like I got a reasonable handle heading in the good direction on all of those. I wouldn't say you have to be perfectly healed, but I want you to be in a better place so that you're not stirred up and you're not in the flight and fight. How do you know that? Well, your sleep is going to be doing better and your weight's going to be stable again. You're going to see that your body is showing signs that the chronic inflammation is coming down. So I would look for those things. The next thing I would do is I would really, the next time you met somebody, ask yourself what attracts you to them. Is it that they've said something that's kind of exciting and scary? Is it the way that they've been looking at you? And then I would ask myself, can I not make a decision and watch this person over a long period of time and see whether or not this is really a person who says that who they are and that is really good for them, and I'm not just being all worked up and excited just because it's causing lightning in a bottle or butterflies in my stomach. So that's just some things I would do. I would definitely do. Each personality disorder has a primary theme, what it's preoccupied, what it needs to have. Narcissism is a lot about being right. Yes, they want control. That's certainly a big dynamic, but not only control, but they need to be correct, and they'll fight you to the death to prove that they're correct. So how do you get someone who has this rigid worldview of being right, always being right, that they're wrong? And the other part of personality disorders is that the associated drama. They go from crisis to crisis, and they use drama as a way to maintain control. They're not going to relinquish control. They're going to always remain the dominant position, and they have to be right. And you want them to admit wrong. The closest I've ever seen them get to is to admit that they're wrong for hurting your feelings, which is really saying they're not wrong on the principle, and they're not wrong for their behavior. They're not apologizing for that, but they'll apologize that you have hurt feelings. Whatever, that's actually not even an apology. How can you apologize for having hurt feelings? Because it's your reaction. Your reactions are your reaction. People don't cause your reaction. You react because of the way you're built. So I think it takes what I have noticed is it takes a lot of pain for the person. They have to hit their own rock bottom of some kind, whatever that is. I don't know what brings them there. It has to be some big crisis for them. But until that crisis occurs, I don't see them as being terribly sorry. And here's the other thing. So I'm going to ask you a question. Why do you need them to be sorry? I know I wanted that for a long time. It's what I pursued religiously, is for an apology from someone. But why? Why can't I give that to myself? Because I'm not going to get that from them. And is it really necessary to have closure? Can I get closure from saying to myself, what this person did was wrong? They were allowed in my life. I'm now not going to allow them in my life. And so I'm going to shut down their access to me and protect myself in a different way. Isn't that really, when we're wanting someone to be sorry or we're wanting change, but isn't that really the change that we need, is to limit their access to us? That's how I approach it. I approach it from a different angle. Yeah, I actually have fantasies. I will admit to you, I have fantasies where in my head, I think, oh, what would it feel like if we, for example, there's a risk mine may sue me for the book. I've talked to an attorney. I know I'm pretty careful about what I have in the book, but he'd have to prove some things I think would be super hard to prove. And I've got a lot of evidence. So the cards are stacked in my direction. But if that happened, I would get to have my say. I would get to look at him and say, this is what you did wrong. And it put a whole public record. You all then would know finally who this person is. I would like that. That would make me feel good. So, yeah, it would feel powerful to be able to sit there and point all this. But would I get what I wanted, which is true ownership, responsibility, and accountability? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So that's why I don't stay there. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. Wasn't that interesting to hear that there are 10 different personality disorders? Which of the 10 have you met? Maybe you've even lived with around one of them. I'd be interested to know more. Consider dropping me a note and telling me about that experience. And until Monday, bye-bye.